The Profit Constructors presents How to Build an Advisory Team, a panel discussion with colleagues from Palececk and Palececk Law, Workboot Consulting, and Sunflower Bank.
I am Tanya Schulte. I'm the founder of the Profit Constructors, and we work exclusively with construction contractors in helping them get their workflow and process aligned with their accounting, what they want to happen in the back office. And we've been doing that for just over 7 years, but my entire career has been in construction accounting. So it's about all that I know, and I really do enjoy it. That's why when Jonathan got here and brought his labor burden, labor costing problem to the forefront, I was like, yes, let's go dig into that. But that's not really why we're here today. So Rick, would you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
In the trades my entire career, except for a little gap when I was in retail. So owned and operated general contracting business, plumbing business, moved into the coaching training world. So I'm part of the John Maxwell team. I'm a certified coach, trainer, consultant, Lean Six Sigma, all that other good poop. And I work exclusively with contractors.
Awesome. Karen, want to tell us a little bit about you?
Well, thank you for having me. And I have been doing construction law and litigation for 35 years this year. I have never worked in the trades, but I do think in another life, I would love to do that. I don't have that skill. So I went to the books to try to learn as much as I could. And I really don't know anything else but the construction area. And I love the industry itself. Oh, thank you, Tanya.
Yeah. Scott.
Well, good morning, and thanks again, Tanya, for inviting me. So my name is Scott Ubetta, and I am a commercial banker. I've been in the banking industry for about 30 years, been specific to the commercial banking side of things for about 23 of those years. I work for Sunflower Bank. We're about an $8 billion bank holding company operating in 5 states. We have customers in the commercial space across multiple different industries. One of those is the construction trades, both as somebody that helps finance construction loans, but also as a company that banks general contractors and subcontractors. I'm also a licensed certified public accountant here in the state of Arizona, although I don't practice as one. But that's just a little bit more about me, and I guess that would be it. Thanks again for letting me join.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you guys all so much for being here. So one of the first things I was going to say is, this whole panel is about building your advisory board and or advisory team, I think is what we called it. A board might be a little bit of a different thing, but from the standpoint of a business owner, I think it's so important, and I would love for you other professionals to weigh in, to surround yourself with other professionals in other specialties, right? So from the trade standpoint, like we often say, a lot of folks are really excellent tradespeople. But then when it comes to all the other aspects of managing and running a business, there are just holes in what they know. And I'm going to start off by saying I was the exact same way. When I started this accounting business, I knew my trade of accounting really well. Like I said, I've always done construction accounting. So in terms of how to actually do the construction accounting work that I was, telling clients I could do, I knew that inside and out, and didn't have a problem with that. Where I struggled at the early stages of my business was knowing how to manage and effectively run my business. And so all of us, I believe, have been there in terms of like, okay, what is the next step I should take? But that's where I think it's important to surround yourself with other folks who have other areas of expertise that they can lend as you're on that journey. And in this case, the folks that we brought to the table and suggest that you're probably going to want to surround yourself with are a business coach, an accountant, a lawyer, and a banker. And I would say specifically a banker who understands something about your industry and has, done work with something relative to your industry. So I'm going to start with you, Rick, and ask you, like, when it comes to running a business, any business, but specifically we're speaking like in this construction trade space where all of these professionals play a lot. What are some proven strategies that you recommend that business owners do?
First one, slow down,
Mm.
because they're usually running so fast. I was just talking to somebody just before this, and they said, I've got a million jobs to do. And it's like, okay, well, first thing you have to do is slow down. So that's why any client that I ever meet with, the first thing we do is we look at them. We do a leadership assessment on them. We do a personality assessment on them, how they communicate, how they process communication, how they get communication information to everybody else. The other thing that I always encourage them to do is to define success. What does success mean to you? I mean, it's a great goal to see that person that, I want to be at 5 or 10 or $20 million. I mean, that's awesome. But understanding the amount of work that it takes to get to that point, and maybe, just maybe, you want to get efficient at where you're at, which could be the $500,000 mark, could be 750, a million, whatever. Get really efficient with that. And everybody's always heard of the phrase, if you're not growing, you're dying. There's people think that's growing in size. It's not growing in size, it's growing in efficiency.
Great.
And it's 20% of $1 million is a whole lot better than 10% of a higher number. So just understand what success means to you. For a lot of people, it's just taking Friday afternoon off to go golfing with their friends. That's their goal. I remember a point in my life that was my goal. I just want to take Fridays off. That's all I want to do. So that's what we have to do is figure out what success means to you.
I love that. Great point. I think about the growth, right? One of the things when we, as a business, the Profit Constructors, think about our ideal client, one of the things that we have about them is that they must be growth minded. But that's exactly right. When I point that out to our ideal clients, as we're talking to them, whether they're prospects or they've already come on board, we talk about, we're not necessarily talking about revenue growth when we ask you to be growth minded. So that's a great point. Karen, you mentioned you've been doing construction law for a long time. Why did you decide to focus on construction law? What led you down that path?
Well, I wanted, I watched a murder trial. My dad was a lawyer in Ohio, had a small practice, and his partner was an amazing trial lawyer. And I watched him defend this woman who was accused of killing her family. So I liked that litigation, but my grandpa also had a construction company, and I thought I wanted to drive dump trucks, and I kind of put the two together. But I wanted to see if I could add, I have been practicing construction law. That's my trade. But in 1996, I decided to open my own practice and my own business. And I knew nothing about that really. I mean, I did have my dad to talk to, and he gave me some good advice, but I was already a member of that American Subcontractors Association and had maybe only a handful of clients. And I spoke to Mike Markham, who's a very, very successful businessman in the construction industry. And he was the one that kind of said, well, you definitely need to get a banker. And he introduced me to the president of National Bank. He was the one who kind of guided me on surrounding myself with that team. And, it was just me when I started. And it was really just more wanting to have the flexibility. I was a single mom, but I also wanted to earn more money. I didn't have any accounting people. I learned, so it was a whole new process. But I did start off small and slow, and knew that I wanted to be able to be a mom and be there for my kids, but also balance, my career and sticking with just construction law. And eventually I hired my brother. It's Palececk Palececk. And he kept saying, well, can we do other types of law? And I'm like, as soon as we're not busy in construction law, Jim, you can go ahead and try another case. But we have stayed very focused on the construction industry, and we became partners in, well, first he started as my associate attorney, and then we became partners in 2001. And everybody said, you went to work for your sister? And they said, well, yeah, she bossed me around my whole life. So
I love that.
And I'm still glad today that Rick, I've kind of done what you said. I certainly have never tried to grow too crazy, because it really wasn't what my goal was. I never wanted to have so much growth that I couldn't handle it. And I wanted to be able to keep clients. Like with Markham, I'm on the second generation, and most of my clients are moving into that second generation of representation. So to me, that's the best compliment is repeat clients.
That's something actually that we just recently did with ASA University too. The whole idea of like succession planning, right? Like what's going to happen with when you're a small business owner, what's going to happen to that business when you're ready to move on? And I know, Rick, you and I have talked about that as well too. Scott, I'd like to kind of ask you, maybe more in some broad terms, if you can, what is it that you're looking for when a construction company in particular approaches you, and they want to maybe do some lending with you? What is it that you need from that construction company in order to be able to do business with them well?
So I think probably just a couple of things. I mean, financial capacity and also competence, right? And I think competence has a lot to do with the team, like we're talking about today, the team that you surround yourself, both internally within the company and also externally outside the company, right? So if we're looking at somebody in the construction trades, we want to make sure that their estimators have experience and they can accurately estimate a job, and both in terms of cost and terms of timing, right? Because both of those things are money, obviously. So if the company has the internal competence to be able to accurately estimate the jobs that they're going to be able to do and when they're going to be able to start and finish them, that gives the bank a lot of confidence that the financial information that we're looking at, the projections that we're looking at, we can really place a lot of emphasis and reliability on those things. And that just gives us confidence to take the next step with that customer. So I think industry experience and how that folds into competence is really what we're looking for. I mean, obviously we want to see a track record of profitability. We want to see all the internal components, the legal, the regulatory, all of those things. Those are kind of the boxes we need to check, but the kind of the qualitative aspect are those other things. How does management think through their overall company internally and externally? The other thing I would say that I really liked what Rick said was slowing down. One of the things that we discuss with all of our customers is beginning with the end in mind, right? So if you're in business or thinking about starting business, I mean, what are you looking for to accomplish? I mean, is one of your kids going to take over the company? Are you trying to get to a certain EBITDA number so you can sell it at a certain multiple? What are those goals? And, we can help a lot of times bring in some of our resources from our wealth management team or just from our network of attorneys or ESOP underwriters, just to help think about those goals at the end so that, you're not just waking up every day and putting out the next fire. Every day is a purpose and it's working towards a specific goal. So the more you can slow down and think through those things, I think the better off the company is. And certainly the bank likes to see stuff like that because it shows competence and thoughtfulness. So
that makes a lot of sense. I'm actually working with a software development company that wants to develop a program for construction accountants in particular to help their clients understand their sort of KPIs and maybe a roadmap. And one of the things I was meeting with that developer yesterday, myself and another accountant, and one of the things that came up in that discussion was that end goal that you were talking about, Scott. And it's amazing how sometimes even large construction companies or other types of companies can lose sight of the end goal of net profit. And so one of the things that came up yesterday was how can a construction company accurately assess net profit? Because oftentimes they get caught up in looking at everything project-based, right? And so forgetting how like over and under billings are affecting the bottom line. And so just really like consistently taking all of the numbers across the wide variety of reports that might be available and applying them together so that the entirety of how the company is functioning is being handled. Sometimes companies are focusing too much on the P&L. Sometimes they're focusing too much on the WIP. those two have to merge and tell the whole story, right? So I think that's part of it too, is like helping to guide the client in terms of, okay, what's the next right step to take? But let's look at the company holistically before we make those types of decisions.
100%. Yep, I agree. Sorry.
What was that? Sorry, Scott.
I just said I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that was it. I was done. Thank you. Rick, I know that you work a lot with trade clients and that they often, like Scott, you pointed out, there's this, you said slow down. Scott, you said you're putting out fires. How do you kind of, Rick, guide and direct the clients to slow down? Like, what are steps that they can take to get out of fire? How can we get into fire prevention mode rather than just constantly chasing fires?
Well, it's like what Scott said, is, start with the end in mind. So this is where we want to be. And the first thing that we talk about is, what does that process look like to get there? So if your goal is to do whatever project it is, what are the steps to get there? And because I've been in their work boots, I've done all the things that they're doing, they can't really, bull crap me, because it's like I know exactly what you're doing. And when they say, I don't know how that happened, it's like, well, I do. And so we map it out. And because I don't just do coaching, and this is the thing that I want people to understand. The name coach has got a kind of a bad rap. It's like home inspectors about 10, 15 years ago. It's just like everybody who had an extension ladder and a flashlight became a home inspector. I do consulting. And I do coaching, I do training, I do mentoring, and all that other sorts of stuff. So when somebody says, I don't know what that process looks like, I say, just write it down. It can be a handwritten note, take a picture of it, and I will create that process map for you. So when we do the process map, and because it's got kind of Lean Six Sigma methodology, which is, finding out where the delays, the gaps, and those other sort of things are involved, and they said, well, what is that? I said, well, think of it as a wiring diagram. Think of it as any sort of map that we're using. So when they do that, then we go through and we say, okay, well, you can see where, the estimate handoff is a problem. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, when you take that estimate that you've worked so hard on, you've got, whatever software you're using, whatever takeoff system you're using, it's done, it's ready to go, and off it goes, and you just fire it off as a paper airplane to the project manager, and there's no production meeting. That's where it's going to fall apart. And so we talk about that and say, okay, let's figure out a production meeting. And this is what I talk about too, is a lot of residential contractors, they go out, they meet a client, they love the client, they spent money to get this client, they bring them on board, and then they just hand it over to their team. Well, they haven't explained to their team what type of client this is. This is what this person wants. This is how they want to be treated. This is how they want to be talked to. This is how we handle change orders, and so on and so forth. So a lot of it is, just stop holding it up here in your head, write it down. What is the process? And I feel really bad. Like I had a guy reach out to me yesterday, and he's a prospect. So I have to call him a prospect because I don't like sales. I really don't. I like helping people. So he's somebody that came to me for some help. So we're on the call, and he's got 57 employees, doing really well, dragging. All of a sudden, he's got $500,000 worth of debt that he's trying to unbury. So I said, okay, what was your gross revenue for last year? And when you bring a carpenter or somebody into your home, nothing is ever level-ish. It's level, or it's plumb. It's not plumb-ish. So when he gave me his revenue, he was kind of like, well, you want billings? Or it's like, what money landed in your bank account? He said, around. I said, okay. I said, this is a problem. So the first thing that we have to do is what does that process look like? Tell me what it looks like. Tell me what information your accounting is giving you on a daily basis. Tell me what guidance you're getting on a daily basis, those types of things. So they have to tell me, paint me a picture of what it looks like. And we work on those processes one by one, because everybody's business is different. And this is the thing about a lot of coaches, trainers, is they put you into a machine and they spit you out in this little sausage factory, and out you come at the other end. where you're going to be the CEO or whatever it is you're going to do. A lot of contractors may not want that. A lot of them say, I want to still be on the tools. I want to be in the field. I don't want to be in the border. And so anyhow, that's what you want to do. Those are the things that we do. What does that look like? If you don't know what it looks like, I'll paint a picture and I'll show you what it looks like.
I think that's fantastic. Like starting with the end goal in mind. I think that sometimes it's easy to just assume that things in your company are running the way that you think that they ought to be, right? So it's when you were talking about that handoff, I've been guilty of the exact same thing here in this business, same thing. Saying to team members, great, we just landed this new client. We have written processes, go follow those, without that meeting and that handoff meeting and being able to say, here's this particular client with their particular needs, desires, preferences, all of those things, which are so important. And so one of the things that we've been trying to keep a balance on in our business recently is how do we create great process and be able to move everything through that process, but also still bring that human touch. And that ability to understand who the client is and what their particular needs are. So that's always got to be that balance. And it is a balance. Jonathan. Oh, you're on mute. You're muted, Jonathan.
So just a couple, because I have to leave. I just want to reinforce your point. I am bringing on an apprentice bookkeeper, an intern, and we have a new client coming on, and vendor reconciliations is a big portion of what we do. I want to have now a team meeting to get the experienced people back in, because they actually learned it from somebody else, and make sure that everybody is doing relatively the same process under the constraints of how they receive the vendor statements. So, not just like having, we have a best practice or, getting it out, but really sitting and, taking another look at it and helping people understand what's, going to be the most efficient way. The other thing that you talked about very early is about exit. And, I've gone through Joe's classes 2 times now on exit strategy. We have some young clients in their mid-30s. They don't have any of the pieces in place, not because they need to exit, but if you do the things to get them ready for exit, you make the business resilient and you reduce risk. And I'm going to leave you with those thoughts. And we should schedule time, Tonya, to go after my meeting to go over what our best practice is going to be from taking information from Service Titan and classifying the labor into QuickBooks Online.
Yes, I would love to help you with that. We're very familiar with it. No, really quickly before we have to go, I want to say one point too, which is in a different panel that I was on recently. There was a restructuring lawyer in there, Jonathan, and that was his point. Like often when people come to him and they're at that drop dead point of like either we're going to restructure or go bankrupt.
Right.
In those best practices, right? So it's like exactly what you're saying. If they would just have at the beginning thought, what's the end goal and how do we place these best practices, it would have gone so much better. So yeah, to your point, succession planning and knowing what the exits are is the best way to go. Good to see you.
I can't stay longer. I wish I could.
No,
nice to meet you, Jonathan. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Karen, let's switch gears just a little bit and kind of talk about I think having a lawyer on your team is so important. I have someone that I reach out to on a regular basis just to be able to ask the right questions for my business, right? And so how do you help guide your clients and kind of help them stay abreast of the things they need to know? Let's say it's regarding construction contracts or anything that they need to know. How do you kind of help guide clients?
Well, I would say, since we are, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's the contract in every business. It's the written agreement, and that will prevent the litigation. I have a lot of clients that come in and say they have all these contracts. They don't know how to job cost. They don't know, they've signed agreements that have so much risk on them that they could lose their entire company. So I think that, no matter, I don't know if do we have any contractors on this call?
I don't think we do.
Okay, well, but either way, the contract is so important, as well as obviously transactional. And we don't do that much transactional work. If it's very specialized, we, refer it out. But I do the same kind of an assessment, to make sure I'm the right fit for them, or there might be certain things they need in place, like a good banker or a good accounting, especially those that really don't have that knowledge of job costing, and they come to me and, want to, sue somebody for $20,000. Well, does that make sense?
Yeah.
If it's millions of dollars, maybe, but if you've got all your processes in place, your agreement's good, your accounting, so you can show, especially if it was a wrongful termination, you have to be able to prove lost profits. Well, how do you prove that you lost profits? And if you don't have a lot of the accounting things in place, then, a jury's not going to award you any profits because your damages are speculative. So, it's most of the people that come to me usually start in because they're considering litigation, but I love the ones that really want to learn how to review an agreement and know that first component, if they are contractors, is so critical that you have it reviewed. And that includes, I usually say, who's your insurance agent, and do they understand insurance and construction insurance? Because the insurance is such a big part of a construction contract. Your banker, so I'm always talking about the team when they first walk in the door. And a lot of them are sophisticated, but there's many that aren't. And that I do love that part, to try to guide them and refer them to the team that they need, whether it's consulting, insurance, business, banking, whatever it is.
You make a really good point. We could round this whole team out with an insurance broker, right? Someone who really can guide and lead and direct on that side as well. It's a really good point. Scott, do you find the same thing? Like Karen said something that I went ding, 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 because I feel like people often reach out to any one of those types of professionals for help. And do you find it's the same thing in the banking world? Do they often reach out when the ship's not really right? Is there times where you kind of have to step in and help guide them in the right direction and say, okay, well, first steps, we're gonna have to get you guys a good accountant, or first steps, let's make sure some of these processes are going better in your business?
It happens all the time. And it's not, and I always try to take the position of it's not our job to run the company. So we try not to give that impression. We're not arrogant in that way, but we've seen enough of these, right? So take the approach of look, you're talking to people that have experience, that we see a lot of companies in a lot of different industries, and you start to see recurring patterns with some of the companies, right? And it's not uncommon at all where somebody will come to you and maybe they're just growing way too fast. And I can think of one right now that we have. And this company didn't want to make the investment in terms of hiring a CFO and vetting the proper people, right? Because that's a big expense. Well, I mean, he's at the point now, and actually we were at the point before we could do the loan for him. We said, look, we've got to clean up your books. We can see that you're making money. We see the contracts, but you need to be able to show us that these jobs are profitable. You need to be able to show us that you're collecting your invoices, right? And we need to be able to validate and calculate your turn times, and just make sure that, because you may be making all the money in the world from a accrual standpoint, but if you're not collecting cash, you can't repay the loan. So one of the things, the exercises that we go through, we don't just check the box and say we need this, and this in terms of a financial statement. We're going to dig in and we're going to say, okay, let's help make sense of this. And so we'll recommend CPAs, we'll recommend bookkeepers, we'll recommend attorneys, just depending on what the need is of the company and where the holes are that we see. Yes, it happens all the time. And that's actually kind of the fun part of the job, to be honest with you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of like, that is the fun part. That's why, when Jonathan got here a little bit ago and said he had a client that's onboarding and they have something new and different that they need to help, like that is part of what I think does make it exciting, right? Like doing that guidance with the client and helping them grow their business, helping them put better processes in place. I think all four of us would say that's something that's rewarding to be a part of and to watch these businesses as they over time grow. We have a client like that just recently, would, by reason of bringing on a good advisory team and putting better processes in place, went from really struggling and just sort of breaking even to like year over year now they're experiencing really good steady growth revenue wise, but also like overhead has remained fairly steady too. So it's not, it's been a really great growth pattern for them. So it's been really, really cool to watch. Nicole put in the chat, and I think she had to step away, but she put revenue is ego, profit is wisdom. I love that. Back to something that you said, Rick, like a lot of times these guys, I think sometimes out of fear and sometimes just out of it's what they know to do. And so they can, and they're really good at it, they go do it. But a lot of these times people are chasing revenue again, without checking that bottom line to see, what, along with that revenue, what's happening to the company. So Rick, to that point, how can you help them kind of really see, you were talking about success, but how do you help them like really see revenues don't necessarily equal success?
It's the same process of identifying who they're, what state they're in. A lot of them, and God bless most entrepreneurs, they manage their business based on what's in the bank account. It's not long term. It's just trying to see how much is in there. Some contractors I've seen take those deposits and they go into the bank, and sometimes they spend it even before the job starts, which is a dangerous thing to do, because what happens if that client cancels and you got to give the deposit back that you don't have. So when we look at how busy they are, and that's one of the first questions you ask, is how busy are you? How much time are you putting into the field? How much time are you putting in the office? Explaining to them that just because you don't have a hammer or a pair of pliers in your hand and you're home and you're on your computer, you're still working. And working at 9 o'clock at night is the same as working at 2 o'clock in the afternoon swinging hammers. So explaining to them that you need to slow down. Not every client that you have is going to be your client, and everybody on here has had their own business and they were just over the moon happy when finally you opened the door and somebody called you. It's like, oh my God, I got a client. In time, you have to narrow that down and be sure that the clients that you have are the ones that you want. And that's what we talk about, just slowing the process down, being a lower volume, higher margin company. This is what you want. You don't want to be, the discount store, the dollar store, the Dollar General. You want to be somebody that's doing a little bit better. So we look at a comparison, the amount of hours that you put into it, the amount of time that you're managing, the team that you have, the size of your team, explaining to them that you can only manage a certain amount of people before you have to bring somebody else in to assist you in that process. And looking at it and breaking it down, revenue to employee. And the simple one is the service industry, where you can say, okay, you've got 5 trucks on the road, this is how much money you should be bringing in that range. You're not anywhere close to that range, so something's not right. Support staff, ratios, you can't have every employee in the field have their own personal support worker in the office. Those ratios do not work at all. So when they talk about the amount of money that's coming in, they look at it as I got really good cash flow. It's like, yeah, but you're not profitable. This is not sustainable. At some point you will die, but it's a matter of time. And it's the day you die is the day the cash flow stops. So anyhow, long story, kind of circling it back in, just understand that it's the numbers. And they always say numbers don't lie, but numbers will tell a story. Right. So when you look at revenue per employee, that tells a really good story. When look at the ratios, that tells a really good story. Revenue per hour tells a really good story. volume does not tell a really good story. It simply is. I said to one client, I said, "Wow, you're laundering money." I said, "That's all you're doing." I said, I said, "God bless you." I said, "But I said you're laundering money." I said, "So it's just money in, money out." I said, "It's just going around and around." So anyhow, long story short, you got to slow it down. Not everybody is everybody's client, and you look at that from a marketing perspective. You know, if Rolex was targeting to Timex clients, that's not the clients that they want, and they're going to target to the client that they want. So anyhow, you got to make sure that your clients are the right people, your team members are the right people. Slow it down. Less is more. And I don't like catchphrases, but yes, less is definitely more when it comes to that. Yeah,
I love it.
Can I interject a thought on that?
Yeah, please.
sure.
So I love that conversation and how it would tie in from a banking standpoint. If you think about, we love asking for a WIP report for subcontractors, because that tells the story, like you were saying, right? If you're able to slow down and make the investment into really looking at each job on a job by job basis from the beginning, right, to the estimating stage, to the project, and see it all the way through. And then at the end of that project, if you're able to say, okay, what was my gross margin? What was my net margin on those projects, and be able to kind of look at a list of however many jobs you've done over the last 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whatever it is, you'll very clearly be able to see which jobs were the most profitable and which ones were not. And then you can peel that back a little bit more and say, okay, what was it about those jobs that made them profitable? And feed that loop back to the beginning of your estimating, right? Number one, did we estimate it right? Or number two, was it just the wrong type of job? Or did something in between go haywire? But what I've seen is it gives the company the knowledge to be able to choose on the front end which jobs they're going to take, because they know up front which ones are going to be the ones that fit their company, which ones are the most profitable, and where they want to make that investment. So again, it comes down to slowing down. And another phrase that we all hear is garbage in and garbage out. If you're just slapping together a WIP report so you could send it to the bank and check the box, that's great. But it's not really, I don't think, what the bank's looking for, and hopefully not what the business owner's looking for. We want that business owner to say, okay, and dig in and say, okay, what is it about this, and how do I get there? How do I change, what I'm accepting in terms of my work and what I'm actually doing and everything in between, so that they are being as efficient as possible, I guess, which is the other thing we talked about. And the last thing I'll say about that is, I've seen companies get starry-eyed about certain projects because they've got big names attached to them or big top line dollars attached to them. But, again, we've said it before, you take a big top dollar size contract, and if your margins are nothing on those, all you're doing is laundering money, like you said, at a larger scale. So anyways, it's digging in and fine tuning. So I like that discussion. That gets me excited. So yes. Thanks for letting me jump in.
Yeah, same thing. I think that we have seen, unfortunately, some sad stories in that regard. What's something that you were saying, Scott? We had a client come to us one time who were really amazing at their trade and had been actually asked by a very large national GC to come and do work. And it was like, it was exciting to them, and they jumped in to go and do that without any research as to what was going to happen or how they needed to manage that contract. So to your point, Karen, they signed contracts that they didn't know what were in them. They didn't have any idea, anything about how to create proper draw requests, how to do any sort of pre-qualification. So there was just a lot of unknown questions that they had to take that job. And then that job basically made that company bankrupt because they didn't know that there was going to be maybe 60 to sometimes 90-day holds on their draws before they were paid, and their cash flow suffered. They ended up trying to take out some quick cash loans. I mean, just the whole thing. And by the time that they came to us, unfortunately, they were already so far down that rabbit trail that we tried, we stepped in and we, tried to negotiate some things with the bank. We tried to get some things done, but that didn't happen. On the other end of that, though, like what we see again, some of those huge success stories is we've had companies come to us and say, hey, we're trying to get this particular bond or this loan, and they're asking us for a WIP report. Can you help us produce it? So we'll step in and we'll help them get that crafted as quickly as possible. But it opens that door in a really positive way to come in and help them understand how to take that WIP report that we've crafted for them and make it an ongoing tool that they can use to manage their business. And so that's, again, I get excited about that too, Scott, because you can see where I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, sometimes I think you can tell the difference between someone who slaps together a WIP report and someone who takes the time to actually understand and use the WIP report to manage their business.
100%. Yep.
Yeah. Karen,
that's an opportunity for us to be part of the advisory team, right? And say, hey, I see you provided this report. Let's go through it and step by step, job by job, provide a true partnership, and some value add.
Yeah. To that point, I would like some feedback from all three of you. How often are you actually working hand in hand with other folks on some client's advisory team? Meaning, like, how often, Karen, would you interact with someone's accountant or someone's coach in terms of helping them do their business?
A lot, actually. In some of the major litigation, I do end up hiring experts, but sometimes it's forensic accountants, but they have, I have to work with the accountants that are providing the information, with insurance agents. As I've said, I don't necessarily know what my client's insurance is. So in reviewing a contract with all these requirements, if it's primary, non-contributory, some of the things that are in the insurance provisions of a contract, we really do need an insurance expert. And so I do work with them. The bankers, like I have been involved with bankers when some of these subcontractors want to take on a major general contractor on an ADOT project. And we've sat down with the bank and, looked at all the documents, it's all the time. But we do have to hire experts, but I also have to use the team to better understand my client's position. Can they afford the litigation? Can they afford the fight? And just to really evaluate what those next steps are. If they haven't been paid some money, did they, do a mechanics, preliminary 20-day notice? They may have a lien service company that they use that's part of their team, or, whatever it is. And it's constant evaluation, frankly. And sometimes I have to tell people, when you want to litigate, you also have to look at how that's going to take you away from your business. So if you are, you're going to be spending a lot of time with me, you're not going to be generating maybe that revenue or, whatever it is. And so it really is a constant evaluation in my practice and using their team members to help make some of the decisions.
That makes a lot of sense. You raised some points that I really hadn't ever even thought about before, Karen, in terms of like, litigation isn't an easy, I've known this, but like just the whole thought process that would have to go into, is this truly litigation worthy before we even go down that path? And like you'd mentioned something earlier, even like, how are we going to prove what we're saying? And so that's where a lot of these processes must come into place. If the business has been being sort of run willy-nilly, there's no documentation for the facts.
Right.
Makes a lot of sense. Rick, how often do you work with other team members and reach out and say, hi, I'm working with this client and I see that you're their accountant or their lawyer. Let's get together and have some conversation.
Now on a regular basis. A long time ago, I wasn't. And I remember sitting there one day, it's like, I'm asking these guys to report on stuff that they really don't know. And they're assuring me that everything's okay. And they're assuring me that everything's fine here and that things are good. So I said, I want to talk to your bookkeeper and accountant. Well, why? It's like, okay, let's find this out. So when I remember getting on a call with one of the accountants, and they saying, well, how long you been working with, Bob? I said, well, a while now. So yeah, I kept saying the charge coming through and I just always wondered what it is you do. It's like, well, bad on me for not reaching out, but bad on you for not asking your client what this expense was for. So I do it on a regular basis, and I love talking to the bookkeeper and accountant. Hopefully it's the same person. Sometimes they're not, but anyhow, and they're painlessly loyal to bad people. I don't understand why they don't want to switch this bookkeeper. It's like, look, your bookkeeper is not doing the proper job. But anyhow, I try and do it on a consistent basis. Most of my clients do not have an HR department, so I become their HR department. Most of my clients do not retain legal counsel, so sometimes I have to give them guidance with a big warning at the bottom that I am certainly not qualified to give you advice and merely give you guidance. When it comes to somebody, a banker, some financial advice and guidance on those sorts of things, that's what I was telling them. It's like, stop trying to hide money. You're trying to build your credit profile. You're trying to build your business up, but it is usually the bottleneck in that entire process is, guess who? The business owner. And trying to get everybody all working on the same page is sometimes very much a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell them, I am a general practitioner. I'm not an expert in banking or HR or accounting or legal. I will give you some basic advice, but if we need the expert in here to answer these questions for you, and you need to take the time to invest in talking to those people and making sure that you're getting proper guidance and advice. And they may call themselves an accountant, but they may not be the right type of accountant. They don't understand how construction works. They don't understand those types of things. They may be a good financial advisor in their field, but they don't understand where you're at about building, not trying anyhow. Long story short, a lot more now than I used to, but it is like pulling teeth a lot of times with contractors trying to get that information. And what's interesting too is I do get on calls with really good accountants where my client is complaining about how horrible they are and I can't get good reports from them. And guess what the accountant has to say? I can't get the information that I need from them on a consistent basis. So instead of using QuickBooks, I just give them a spreadsheet. Can you just record the deposits for me? Could you just do that?
Yes, I feel that. I think it's interesting because our team does not do, we're not a CPA practice and we don't do income taxes. So it's always fascinating to me what you were saying, Rick. Even sometimes like I'm trying to be in their books and I want to talk to that CPA. And it's fascinating to me how many new clients will be like, well, why do you need to talk to the tax preparer? Because I'm trying to work in the same arena as the taxer. So that's even an interesting one for me where I'm like, no, that seems like obvious choice that the CPA and I should be on the same page. So it's always interesting, like you said, that the owner will be a bottleneck in some of those cases. How about you, Scott? How often do you try to reach out and work with other members of clients' teams and foster that relationship?
It happens a lot. And the first thing I'll say on that point that you just made is, and this is like, I guess for the audience, is that transparency is key. When you come to the bank and you don't want us to talk to your accountant or your lawyer, big red flag goes up, right? So that's something that the bank is going to say, why? What is it that you don't want us to see? Or what is it that is not, that isn't something that just, what is it you don't want us to see? So, but the other thing I'll say is, to the point about different financial advisors and CPAs not being experts in different areas. I know this as a CPA, not all CPAs are created equal, right? So you got CPAs like me who don't practice, got my license. It's still, but my expertise is more on the banking side. You have some CPAs who are tax experts, estate planners. Some of them are auditors, and some of them are like SEC compliance people, right? So there's all different types of sectors within that umbrella, and finding the right fit for your company is important. So just in terms of the reporting that I see, I would take information that I would get from somebody like Tanya over a CPA that focuses on estate planning any day of the week, right? Just because they're going to have a different level of relevance and expertise to what we're working towards in that same arena. But this whole subject starts with listening to me. So I sit down with a customer or a prospective customer. We talk through what whatever the relevant subject is that we're there to discuss. And I try to listen and I say, okay, what is it that is driving the conversation? What do they need? And again, I don't take the position that I know what's best for them. I see opportunities and gaps maybe, and I say, hey, I think you really could benefit from speaking to a transaction attorney, right? Because maybe they have an offer to sell. And then I think of a couple of names of attorneys that I know, and I say, okay, I'm going to send you some names, some email introductions. You can reach out, have discussions with both, find somebody that fits your personality, fits what you're looking for, or not. We can keep searching, right? So I just try to be that connector in regards to these introductions to the best that I can through my network. Some of these are, like I said, transaction attorneys. Others, if a company is thinking about selling to its employee base, I know a couple of really good ESOP underwriters, which is a whole new fascinating world for a lot of these companies because there's tax benefits to that type of structure, right? So you could really have a lot of different conversation, but again, not to belabor it, but for me, it starts with listening, trying to understand the need, and then trying to make the right connection for people in that regard.
I think that's a really excellent point, and something that, like we don't begin any engagement. I've gotten to be really a stickler about it. And in fact, have even had multiple people ask me, well, can't we just skip that part? And we just don't, because we always begin every engagement with a discovery piece. And it's really all about that. It's just us sitting down with whoever going to be the stakeholders in that project that we're going to do for this company and listening, doing a whole lot of question and answer time and letting them really give us answers. And the better that our team gets at listening. I know when I first started doing that, even when I first started doing discoveries, I would ask the first question, they would give me an answer, and then I would spend the next 15 minutes formulating a solution instead of asking the next best question, right? And so I've had to learn over time how to really listen well, Scott, and to say, okay, great, I love that answer. Let's pour into, maybe there's a piece of that I want to question some more. And so, like, instead of instantly going, oh, well, we could set up this and that would create a whip report for you. And, it's like, no, I need to slow down. As you mentioned earlier, Rick, in my own trade, I've got to slow down and I've got to take the time to really understand, first of all, what's important to that contractor. And then second of all, like, what is the solution? What does success look like for them? What does a solution look like for them? Not what are my pre-made, preset ideas of solutions, but what does the solution look like to them? And am I the right person to bring that right solution, right? So that's a really great point about listening, and something that as an accounting tradesperson, I have had to learn how to be better at doing. So I think that's great in terms of like fostering those relationships. And I also really wanted to lean into something that you said too, Scott, that I don't ever presume what's best for them in terms of like what lawyer should they talk to, or what CPA firm should they use. I can guide them. We have several CPA firms that we know of that are specifically either a 100% construction focus. We have one of those we often recommend, or some that just have a very great division that's 100% construction focused. And so I will usually give like 2 or 3 references for them to go and determine, where they're a good fit, because not everyone is the best fit for every person. So that's, never presuming what's best for them. Karen, in that regard, like, how do you, I'm assuming you will also do discovery type things with clients, right? To really hone in and determine if they're the right fit for Palececk and Palececk.
Oh, and definitely. And that, and Scott, like you said, I mean, listening it really is key. And I think maybe when I first opened my practice, I was so excited just to get a new client, but I am very specialized in what I do, and I don't go outside of my realm. I just, it's not good for the client. It's not good for me. And, you really do have to listen to see what they want and need, and, how you can better direct them. And sometimes I tell people that, you don't want to litigate this. You don't have the tools. You need to get a good construction accountant. You need to get a good bookkeeping process. And I do that. And I do connect them to transactional attorneys or, accountants, or, whatever the issue is, because it's not good for anybody. And one of the things I remember that it has now become a red flag when people come in and say, I'd rather pay you than, get the money. It's like, okay, that is a major red flag. Okay, so give me a $25,000 retainer. And, I just have, obviously experience, you learn these things. At first I probably was like, oh, okay, let's go collect it. And then when they get tired of paying you the money, well, why is your bill so high? Or why, especially if they don't have any of these processes in place and we're becoming their bookkeeper and we're doing that. And my paralegals are, at $170, $180, dollars an hour. And they're kind of going, wait, maybe we could pay less for that. And, to me, I have to assess that right up front, because it's really not worth even taking the money. I'd say, come back to me once you have a, lean process in place, you have a good accountant, you have, good processes. And if down the road you need litigation, I am here for you, but go handle this stuff first.
That's a really excellent point too that you bring up, Karen, which I think is so important. And same thing, we find that to be a big red flag when clients are just asking us, well, can you handle all these other 3 or 4 or 5 things that aren't really in our wheelhouse? And we even had a client one time that came to me and said, can your team just go ahead and create our annual they were an S Corp, and so they had to file their annual report, and they wanted our team to do that. I know nothing about filing annual reports for S Corps. I don't know what needs to be included in there. I don't know, all the sections. So I started to research that because I kind of said, well, let me look into that. And I started, no. No, that's not what we do. We are in the accounting space. We're helping you prepare work reports, right? So it's like really important to hone in on that too, to know what you're good at, and to stay in your lane, and then to let that be a red flag. If that client's like, well, we know you, we trust you, which is great. That's good to hear. And it's nice that you've built that relationship with that client and they feel that level of comfort to ask those questions. But, also a while back, I read the book, The Pumpkin Plan. I think, Anna, you're a certified pumpkin planner. Which is really a great book. And the whole concept of the pumpkin plan is like, if you want to grow the biggest pumpkin at the county fair, you have to chop all the other little pumpkins off the vine, right? So if you just stay in that one lane and you know who your ideal client is and what you're skilled at and what you can perform for them, and you don't get sidetracked by going out and filing, the annual reports for escrow clients when that's not really what you do, you won't be wasting resources, and you'll be able to really hone your craft and do the thing you do well, which I think, Rick, is something that a lot of our clients, need to hear too. I think that's probably part of what you're coaching them all the time is like, don't go after these types of jobs that aren't ideal for you.
No, 100%. And it's funny while you're talking about you doing something for somebody else. I remember getting called in to have a look at a washroom renovation that had just been completed, and you never throw another person under the bus. So I just kind of said, this is interesting. I said, who did the work? Who did the renovation for you? And she said, well, we had the guy, he was doing a foundation repair, and we mentioned the washroom, and he said, well, I can do that. And it was horrible. And she said, is there anything that we can save in here? I said, maybe the shower door. I said, but the rest of it all has to go. I said, unfortunately. So that's where you, as a professional, you need to be telling your clients, this is not what I do. This is not my lane. I can give you a little bit of guidance, but if you want the expert advice, you've got to go speak to the expert. The same as with, as a contractor, the type of work that you do as well. I mean, Michael Gerber talks about it, the E-Myth for contractors. You're cutting grass, and somebody says, hey, can you clean out my gutters? Yeah, I can do that. Next thing you know, you're buying a ladder, then you got to buy a trailer because you got it, and then you got it. So just stick in your lane. Stick to the clients that you know, and then stick to the clients that you like. Stick to the people that you align with. People that see value in what it is you do. Stop exchanging time for money. There's got to be value, and people have to see value in what you're doing. And it's interesting that get back to the numbers. I love the numbers. Is sometimes if you've got good reporting, you can pull up a client that you think might be a bad client, and it's like, bingo. Numbers don't lie. That's a bad client. We've been there 10 times. Average revenue per call is about $100, and we're losing money in every single call. Thanks. You're on the DNC call list now, which is the do not call list, and put them out. So you pick your lane, stay in your lane, which is the type of work that you do, the client that you like, the avatar, what do they believe in, what values do they support, everything else. And you have to do that. And as a professional, you have to know when to say to a client that, look, I would love to help you. Like Scott was saying, if your client is not being transparent with you, look, I need you to be open and honest with me, because if you're not, or this is not going to work out. And as a professional, you have to know your lane. And as a contractor, you have to pick your lane, which is work and clients and, team members and all the other stuff that comes along with it.
Yeah. I'd love to hear some of your success stories. So Karen, what is kind of one of the biggest hurdles that you've ever been able to help a client overcome?
So from a primarily litigation standpoint, I guess, I would say that the biggest hurdle was defending, a multi-million-dollar claim and prosecuting their multi-million-dollar claim. And part of it was because of the long-term representation, we did have a good contract in place, and pretty much that's what it came down to. I mean, other than honesty and witnesses that testified right. But it was the hardest thing I've ever done for me professionally. It was a month-long arbitration of 3 panel arbitrators, and it was very hard. And the clients had made an amazing offer because they knew that it would take them away from their business, so they were willing to cut their claim by so much, but we were also defending what they said we did wrong. And so it was that perseverance, having all the processes in place, knowing how much we were owed. I'm amazed at people that come to me that they're like, oh, we're owed $500,000. Well, send me the unpaid invoices. Well, it doesn't even add up. I mean, it's crazy, but these guys had a very, very good processes in place. We had amazing experts. It was a great team effort. And as hard as it was, we defeated their claim against us and won every penny, including every dime of interest, 1.5% per month for multiple years, and all their attorney's fees. So I'd have to say that was the big success for me, and obviously for them as well.
That's amazing. Rick?
Over the years, there have been, little wins, big wins. But this question came down to me is all about, how they grow as individuals. I'm big on setting boundaries, and I'm big on, helping them start to say no. And over the years, I've seen them, develop confidence in saying no. And we talk about setting boundaries, and I always say it's a fence. The fence serves 2 purposes: keep stuff out, keep stuff in. So I said that's the purpose of setting those boundaries with people. And you've seen, like, from a financial perspective, I've seen guys go out and their accounts receivable was out of control, and they've got it under control. That same person let it slip again because they didn't have a consistent process to make sure that it comes in. Teaching somebody who runs a service-based company that your accounts receivable should be 0. That's not how that's not how things run. But it's just the personal ones, and you develop I've had develop some really close relationships with a lot of my clients because they share a lot of stuff. And when I share my story with them, it's like, I had no idea. I said, that's why, I don't share that story until we get to that point where we can share those types of things. But I've seen them grow as individuals. I've seen them, go through losing employees, getting employees, understanding that person that they just hired isn't the right person, or that person that they terminated was a good person and it was their fault that they left. But I just see a lot of self-growth with a lot of these individuals, which is super, super important. And then the money that they're making, and understanding that, it doesn't have to be $10 million a year in revenue. it's what you take home. That is
Yes.
super important.
You're hitting a really recent exciting client moment that we had in our business just the other day. I was in a month-end meeting with a client, and we were talking over some of the new jobs that they have coming up and making sure that the right processes were going to be in place for those jobs. We do help them make sure that, like Carolyn, you're talking about, like that they're creating those 20-day preliminary notices. And so we were just going through some things with them in a meeting. And one of the jobs was mentioned that I had known was in a prior meeting we had talked about was being bid. And I said, oh, we did win that job. I insert myself into their team, right? So we won that job. And the owner said, well, at first we didn't because we weren't the lowest bidder. And the people who were choosing did go with the lowest bidder. And I loved the way that he described it to me, because he said, after the bid, I knew we had lost the bid, I went out and I found out what the bid was that had won. And I thought to myself, this was my client speaking, he said, I thought to myself, well, I would rather have lost the bid than be the poor sucker that took it for that dollar amount. And I wanted to like jump up and down and do a little cheer, because when he and I first started working together, he was adamant and insisted to me that he must win every single bid. And then he just couldn't understand how his competitors were doing, putting these bids in for so much cheaper. So the interesting part about all this is that the poor sucker that did win the bid ended up not being able to perform, and he was called out. And he had the confidence to say, when they called him out and they said, listen, can you go ahead and finish this job for the bid that was, he said, absolutely not. That was a way underbid job. The budget's ridiculous. We might be able to squeeze a few pennies here and there, but we absolutely have to do it for what we can be profitable at. And so when you see that type of growth in your client, where they're not just chasing work for the sake of chasing work, but they understand how to bid and how to be profitable and how to be okay with saying no, what great growth that shows in a client, and how exciting it is to see that in them. Scott, what about you in terms of like client successes that you've been able to be a part of?
Sorry, I was reading Alan's question, so I guess we'll get to that in a second.
Sorry.
Interesting
Absolutely.
question. Like Rick was saying, there's been a lot of wins, ups and downs, some big ones, right? But the one that comes to mind the most, because I think it kind of ties in everything that we've talked about, is a subcontractor that I bank. When I first started banking them, they were about a little over $1 million in total annual revenue. And now they're about 18 million in total annual revenue. And the story in between that has everything to do with the fun part of my job and why I do what I do. And that it's not because, the bank gives me sales goals to meet every year, and that can be a real grind, but the fun part of the job is talking with customers, developing solutions, and seeing them grow into a bigger company, a more efficient company. That's where the real payoff is, right? So this particular company, we started with their WIP report, like, we've been hammering on, and we looked at their jobs and we said, okay, which ones are the best jobs? Well, through that whole process, not only did we discover and help them identify the best types of jobs for them to be doing and what they were good at, we also identified a couple of verticals that they could go into. So this was a landscape contractor, right? And ultimately now they're doing fencing and block walls, because they were able to kind of see, okay, we see that there's they took on a couple of jobs and they said, wow, okay, yeah, those are pretty profitable. Well, turns out we actually bank a pretty big block manufacturing company, right? So we were able to make that introduction, which is something else we talked about, right? So kind of like hitting different buttons along the way and kind of tying it all together so that this company is now doing the most profitable jobs they should be doing. They found a couple more verticals for their competence and what they like to do. They've increased their revenue and their profitability. So that's probably the success story that comes to mind. And that comes down to us being listeners, advisors, consultants, not just people who push money, because, I'll criticize my own industry here. Our money looks and feels and spends exactly like every other bank's money out there, right? So it's what we're able to do in terms of these other areas, I think, that separates us from them, hopefully. And even if it doesn't, that's the fun part for me. So
I love that. That's a great story. Okay, so Alan, if you, I can read your question, or do you want to just go ahead and kind of state your question? It's up to you. If you want to unmute and welcome.
Hey, thank you. Apparently, I guess I'm at the wrong time because I joined in you guys mid-conversation. I was like, uh-oh.
All good.
So yeah, basically, and I was using this example because y'all were talking about construction and stuff a second ago, but if you're not hired to do something, if you've been hired to do a particular job, to do the financials or something like that, and you notice internal control issues, or you notice operational issues or something else that's outside of the scope. Or in my example, hey, you're painting a house and there's a giant hole in the roof and you know how to put some shingles on or fix that. Do you tell them? And then the homeowner's coming over and saying, hey, how do I fix this? Can you show me exactly how to line up these shingles and what should I do? I'm sorry, buddy, you're not paying me for that stuff. Figure it out on your own. No, I don't understand how to do that. And I can't, and I'm running into that in the accounting industry where they're paying me insignificant amount of money to do bookkeeping, and I've got 2 pages worth of notes that are related to tax issues, legal issues that they're facing, piercing the corporate veil and all this other stuff. I'm like, it's going to take me 2 hours to write this email explaining all the stuff, and I'm still not getting paid for any of it. But if I go to them, I'm like, hey, by the way, you're doing illegal stuff. Your business has no cash flow. You're about to go down in burning flames. But if you want me to help you, you got to pay me, a couple $1,000s. That I'm having a hard time. So if you guys help me out with that, that would be fantastic.
I have some thoughts. Rick, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of like what someone, let's take it from the construction example for a second. If someone's on the job and they see a glaring issue, how would you tell a client to handle that on a construction job site?
And so I was talking to my clients. Always want to know what is the best lead gen. What is the best lead gen? Pay-per-click, this and that, Angie's List, Google, whatever. Build relationships. That's the best thing you can possibly do. And they said, how do I do that? I said, strategic alliances. I said, what do you mean? I said, you go find every other complementary trade that you know of. If you're a GC, find another GC. He does residential, you do commercial, so on and so. So you build this team of trusted advisors that you can turn to. So looking at from your point of view, Alan, the hole in the roof, I'm a painter. Hey, Alan, just want to show you. You got a hole in the roof here. I'm not trying to alarm you. I'm not trying to say it's a big deal, but that's not my lane. I know somebody that can help you if you want me to connect them. And that's what you do. So when I was a GC, I was a different type of GC. Why I brought in my trades to work on a project, if the client turned to me and said, hey, can I get your painter to get a price for doing such and such, that price did not flow through me. I connected the two and got out of the way. As long as my painter did the job for my client, I was good to go. So from a perspective like that, I've had to argue with, accountants about certain things. It's like, no, you're wrong. It's like, and you don't like to say, hey, you got to replace that accountant. But when you see something wrong, it's your duty, it's your responsibility. So from a visual perspective, if you're in your grandma's home, and you see something that's broken, would you walk past it and not say anything? No, you would say, hey, look, grandma, that railing's loose. Point it out to them, don't offer them, but be able to offer them a solution or be able to have a trusted advisor that you could send them to. That doesn't take a piece of you. And this is the thing too, this is really critical. When I hand out somebody's name to somebody, I don't want a kickback. I don't want a referral fee. I don't want anything. Just look after them, take care of them. But what I do expect is a referral in return. That's all I'm looking for. Just a referral. Help them out.
Yes.
Does that make sense, Alan?
It does, except that I want to be a roofer, not a painter. And so I'm having a time where I'm looking at that hole. I'm like, hey, if I could fix that for them, maybe they become a referral source, but probably not, because it's this tiny home. It's not going to help me out a lot, but it's that segue. So yeah. And that's where I run into a little bit of an issue, but I have to, and I've had this in other groups and stuff where you get pigeonholed into what they think you're going to do for them. They're like, oh, you're the bookkeeper, you're the guy, and my tax guy says do this. Well, your tax guy's an idiot because of this, right? So, but I can't say that, because we have to have this thing. So I guess the point is, I hear what you're saying, And again, I'm going back to, I think what Tanya said a second ago about the pumpkins, and maybe this is just one of those pumpkins I need to cut out of the field, because I'm pigeonholed into this stupid $300 a month engagement where it's taking me hours upon hours upon hours to track all of their cash
Yeah.
flow and stuff that's not working, and they're not going to push me up.
Can I ask you a question? Have you posed that question to your client and say, hey, this is what you're paying for, this is the level. Would you, if you wanted more, I'm more than happy to give it for you, but it comes at a cost? Because it's interesting, because I've been that exact same dilemma. I got a client who hired me just for customer engagement sales training, and guess what he's doing? He's asking for more.
Yeah.
Asking for more, asking for more. So as nice as I am, at some point, we're going to have sit down and have a conversation to say, look, I know you only hired me for this, and I'm okay with that. But if you want more, that comes with the cost. And if you don't want that, that's okay. But just understand that this is where we're at. And it's hard because most of us are really nice people. We're really giving. We're really caring. And you want to help people out. But at some point, you got to say no.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so.
I think that comes back to that whole boundaries thing that you were talking about earlier, Rick, in terms of what is it that you do really well? Alan, I have struggled through parts of this as well. And I will say I still don't do it perfectly. But a couple of things. So one of the things you brought up in particular is like, okay, like piercing the corporate veil and things like that. Like I have learned over time to really lean into my strengths, and then to lean into the strengths of that advisory team that Rick was talking about that I put around me, right? So like I mentioned, I don't know if you had been able to join us yet, but earlier I was saying I have like several CPA and accountant firms that I will refer work out to. And so sometimes I have a really great relationship with one local to us firm that they do our books for the profit constructors. You know, they don't do our books. They do our year-end taxes. And then we also have been great referral partners with them for about the last 7 years. And one really great piece of that referral partnership that we've built up is that sometimes I have a client that's not even their client, but I will reach out to them and say, hey, my client is struggling with something, or I see something in their books I think they need to know. Can you reach out to them with me, and we can explain to them how this would be better? And that CPA will maybe join me on a Zoom call, or just send a quick email for me to reach out to the client. And I see that thing get fixed. So that's one piece of it, is I know that I can lean into the expertise that that person has. And even if that's not their client, they'll help me guide my client in a better way. That's one piece of it. But I also think that you're getting closer to your own little epiphany there that I've had to come to in the past too, which is, maybe this particular pumpkin isn't one that's one that I need to keep on my vine because it's too small. Or I need to figure out how to make it one of the big pumpkins. And so I'm going to have to go back to them and tell them this. I now offer this larger scope of service. I actually had a client not that long ago that came to me. We went through our whole discovery process, and we presented our findings and showed them what our scope of work would be if we came to work with them. And they were smart enough to say to us, we see the value of everything that your team brings to the table, Tanya, and our team isn't big enough yet to consume the value that you bring. And so we're not a great fit right now. Yeah. And so that was a great moment on both sides, right? Like we were able to say, you know what, you're right. When you've reached that growth point, we'll be here for you. In the meantime, here's a couple of other smaller bookkeeping firms that will have a smaller set of skills that you'll be able to consume that value that they bring to the table. So knowing what you bring to the table and how to effectively communicate that value also helps too. Karen, what about any legal issues? Like if you're from a contractor's point of view, or, you know, if you're pointing something out on the job, could there be some legal issues that might come into play there?
Whether I would point out things on the job?
Like if a contractor sees something that another contractor is doing that's not correct, could there be some legality involved?
Oh, there is. And basically, if you're in the role as general contractor, you certainly have that overall supervisory role, which is why the contract language is so critical on indemnification and, you know, that shifting of the risk. You know, most general contractors want to try to get out of that. So they try to shift that risk of all, you know, liability and risk to the various trades. Well, in Arizona, you know, you're really only responsible for, you know, you should be only responsible for your proportionate share of your negligence, but contracts are not written that way. And so it really does kind of come down to contract language, but you definitely, if you see something and don't look at it, you could have exposure legally for sure.
It's interesting. Scott, do you have any thoughts on the question at hand, like kind of how to figure out what's your lane?
Yeah, I appreciate the legal aspect from Karen, first of all, because I think maybe that's to the crux of what you're asking, Alan, is just, where is it appropriate to step in? Just as a general statement, in my opinion, and having learned this the hard way in my career, I just feel like it's always better just to rip the Band-Aid off and just be honest. And if you see something that's not right, you just say it. And personally, I like to believe that there's a tactful way to say things, but sometimes the truth is just the truth, right? And especially if you're the roofing contractor in your scenario, right? And you're putting if you're the painting contractor and you see that somebody's doing a bad job on the roof, you say, hey, this roof is leaking and it's going to void your warranty on the paint, right? And then all of a sudden it's relevant to what you're doing. And so there's just I would just think about ways that you could be honest about the situation without throwing somebody else under the bus necessarily, but say, hey, look, I've done a lot of these jobs and I've never seen something like this before. This doesn't look right to me. Maybe you should take this back to your accountant and ask them these questions about it, right? And if you know specific tax code that are relevant, you could say, hey, I heard about, this tax code and this tax code. This doesn't look like it jives with what we're doing over here. Can you kind of show me how this makes sense, right? So I think there's a way to kind of position it to where I guess maybe you're walking delicately or you're thinking about other people's feelings, I guess, but but you're being honest. And if you see something that's wrong, we say it all the time in banking. If you see something, say something, right? And they say that everywhere, I guess, but it's just, there's nothing wrong with being honest and saying what you see. So.
And to Rick's point earlier, he was saying that, he becomes pretty good friends and can build a really good, strong relationship with clients down through the years. And we found that we do the same. And to that point, because of virtue of the fact of the services that we offer, we will tell prospects and new clients, listen, we use the phrase, we're going to be in your underwear drawer. I mean, we're going to be in an intimate relationship here where we're seeing everything from the underside of your company. And to that point, I will often tell them right up front, I will be as honest and transparent with you as possible throughout this process. And like you were saying, Scott, I will say things kindly and tactfully, but we also have a saying internally in the culture of what we do and with our clients, feedback is feedback. So when I point something out and I'm showing you something, it's not to attack you or to attack any other professional. It's just, hey, I happen to see this thing. Let's dig into it and see if we can understand better, like what's going on here, why this might be happening. And at that point, if you're able to offer a higher level of services because you know what the answer is, that can also be injected into the conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's how trust is built, quite honestly. If you're the one to have the courage to stand up and say, hey, I'm thinking about your best interest and I see something that's not right, I think ultimately that client will appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I used to love to watch a fellow Canadian show, Rick, Homes on Homes. Mike Holmes up in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
How many times would he step in after other contractors had, walked away from jobs or been in the middle of jobs and seen things that just, and every time Yvonne and I would watch together, we'd be like, why didn't anyone tell them? And so to Rick's point, like if you're in your grandma's house and you see something, you're asking, why didn't someone tell grandma before now? Right. So if you think about it like that, like I want to help and protect this client, I better speak up and say the things that I see for sure.
To that point, though, if you're waiting on an inheritance from grandma and you see her railings loose, then you've got a dilemma again, right? So
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, but then Karen, there may be litigation involved later, right?
I was gonna say, yeah, there could be all kinds of things.
It would be a proportionate share of my own negligence.
There you go.
I love the lawyer talk.
I love it. We do the Construction Junction podcast, and I had a friend of mine who's also a construction contract attorney here in town. He was on the podcast with me. And towards the end of the podcast, I said, I love how you've answered every single question I've asked today with, well, it depends.
Yes.
It was so funny. He laughed too. He's like, yes, you're right. That is my favorite phrase. Every time you ask me a question, we'll start with, it depends.
That's right. Nothing is black and white in the law.
That's
So,
right.
If I can, I feel like what I'm hearing from you guys, and I value that, and I think that that's probably going to be the right approach, is to bring someone. Usually I'm the guy that all my network goes to and says, oh, something's wrong here. You know, they're commingling funds. They don't understand their reasonable compensation calculations or something. Here, let me bring in this tax advisor, or let me bring in Alan for this or that or the other. I come in, I fix an inventory system, something like that they're not familiar with. I'm that guy, but this is one of my first clients, started out on my own. And I'm like, so I signed him up for this low ball offer. Now I'm like, can I be that guy for him? Because I'm charging everybody else way more. And so this is not working. But I hear what y'all are saying. And if I just use this as a referral out to somebody else, you know, that keeps me from having to negotiate with them on the, you know, the contract and all that. And I think that's good. I think that's what I'll do. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I'll just inject one other thing there too, Alan, which is, if you do want to do that bigger stuff, if you want to go be the roofer, I would say don't be afraid. If that's within your wheelhouse and you have the skills to do that, and you just want to, you know, say, you know what, I quit being a painter, I'm going to go be the roofer. Don't be afraid to go back and ask. I have several clients who are long-term clients that we've done work with for a long time, where I've either had to go back to them and say, I'm just going to be honest, I completely underbid this, and I now realize the level of work. I'm sorry, I can't continue to do the work that you're asking us to do, or the scope that we've taken on for this price. And so we're either going to have to renegotiate, or we're going to have to let you go. And I've had to say that. Oh, and I've also gone to clients who have asked for more things, not necessarily that I've seen, but I've gone to them and said what Rick said earlier, like, absolutely, we can do that work. We're going to increase your scope by this. So yes, if it's a great referral out, and that is the path to take, great. But also I would say, know your own worth and know what you do have the skill set to do, and don't be afraid to ask for the value that you would bring to the table.
And get it in your engagement letter up front.
Yeah.
So they know what you're providing and what you're not. And then when you go back to renegotiate, you can clearly say, this was not within the scope of the engagement services. And I'm putting my CPA hat on now.
And the legal hat. You got to have that agreement, and scope is everything, as you know, in contracting and banking and bookkeeping and legal and everything.
Mm-hmm.
My scope was, I'll prepare tax basis financial statements.
Okay.
So obviously I would like to, take a mulligan on that and go back and
Yep.
do that over again, but that ship sailed. So,
Well, and that's where too, like I said, and depending on that client relationship, right? Depending on how well you know the client and how you think they'll respond. I mean, I've had to do that before in the past. I've had to go back and ask for that, either increase in scope or increase in price, and just lay it all out on the table. Not so long ago, on the opposite side of things, we had a client that I extremely underbid a job for. Yes, I still do it. It happens to me all the time. And we underbid that job, and the client asked someone else on our team. This was really significantly underbid by the profit constructors, wasn't it? Like, they recognized that we had underbid. And so that opened the conversation where we said, yep, you know what, you're right. This is underbid. Here's the amount and level of work that our team has had to put into that. Let's talk about some renegotiation there. So I think clients, back to Scott's point about transparency being key, and I think Rick has said that as well, and that's another reason to get it in writing, to Karen's point about contracts, right? Like, if we upfront get all the right stuff in writing, and then we're transparent when we either didn't put enough in writing, or when, it's outside of that written scope, like, that transparency is so key. But great question. I loved all of the places that took us. I think this has been a fantastic panel discussion. Any last words? Rick, let's start with you. What would you kind of say is like the final thing of, like, why should people have an advisory team? I think that's the important question here.
Comes down to isolation. I mean, you can't do things on your own. You can't be all things to all people. Lean on other people, build that advisory board that you can turn to and say, hey, what do you think? Sometimes you just need a different perspective. That's all you need. And or sometimes you need somebody to push you sometimes, or somebody to pull you back, and you want to be able to lean on somebody else. So I don't know why you wouldn't create something. You've got an advisory board to guide you through the processes.
Yeah, Karen, what's your take on that?
Gosh, I would really second what Rick just said, really. For me as a business owner, as well as advising my clients, I mean, you have to have that advisory team because we can't be all things to all people. And it is a world of specialization, and to develop that strategic alliance, to develop your advisory team, to develop all of those key people in your life will just make, you know, everything work so much better. I mean, if you're missing a huge component of that team, like even just the legal, people think, well, I'm not in litigation, why would I need a lawyer? You know, so, you know, if you don't have that component of your team, you could really be missing out on everything, including your bottom line. You know, so it's just really important in every aspect of our business and our life.
So important. I was thinking when you said that just now, Karen, we had when I first started, I was like, oh, great, here's a example engagement letter off of the internet. I'm going to use that. Fortunately, we never had any problems with it, but at the appropriate time when I felt like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I can't keep using just this sample engagement letter. We had a contract lawyer review the contract and give us feedback and advice, and every step of the way. In fact, not that long ago, something came up where a client said something that made me question something. So I went straight back to that same lawyer. I said, did we think about this? And he said, nope. And we're going to add one more clause. Right. And so just all along the way, having that open conversation with your advisors too, to be able to say, help, like maybe I've missed something, maybe, and maybe because he and I both had poured over that engagement letter, and yet even the lawyer, you know, when this other thing was brought up, he's like, okay, we're going to address that on all of your engagements going forward, Tanya. So it's so important to have that back and forth conversation with those advisory board members. What do you think about that, Scott? Why is this so important?
I would echo exactly what everybody else said. You can't be all things to all people, but, you know, take a big picture view of your business. And, you know, most contractors that I know, they got into the industry, whatever they're in, because they're a good mechanical contractor, they're a good electrical contractor, right? They're a good drywall contractor, whatever. But that doesn't make you a good accountant, doesn't make you a good lawyer, doesn't make you good with regulatory issues and the employee labor relations and all the things that kind of come with that, payroll laws. And I mean, just understand that business is complex, right? And you're not ever going to be able to keep up with every aspect of every job. And it could open you up to liability, could open you up to losses, or it could just open you up to missed opportunity and missed profits because you failed to plan, right? Or you failed to just a lot of different things, right? So understand the complexity of your business, give yourself a break and focus on the things that you're good at, and bring in the people that you need that are good in the other aspects that you need to manage. That would be my advice. Just understand your limitations and bring in the experts on those areas that you're not an expert. So.
I think that's fantastic advice. One of the things that, you know, Karen and I sit on the board together at the American Subcontractors Association. And oftentimes in board meetings, when we're discussing like, how can we help our members that we're serving, who are mostly in subcontractor trades, folks, that's one of the biggest things is like helping them know what they don't know. Right. Like, and so many of them, again, as you said, Rick, are like really good at their trade. Maybe it was you that said, Scott, but they're really good at their trade. It's just those little things that may come up in the course of doing business that they didn't know about, that they'd never heard of, all of those types of things. One last question I think would be super important, keeping in mind like that exact thing. How would construction contractors, since they don't know what they don't know, where would they go to even learn about some of these concepts, or even start to learn that they need an advisory board? Like, how is that concept first introduced to them? Do you have any thoughts on that, Rick?
That's a tough one, because if you go to the SBA website, there's really nothing on that. It's actually, there's not a whole lot on there to begin with anyhow. But I know already the contractors talk to other contractors. I know already that they do. but that information that they're sharing just is going side to side. What's the going rate for this? What do you do with this? And it's really, you're not really getting a proper perspective on it. You need people that are diverse, and you have to, you can't think of what you're doing, whether you're hiring a lawyer or an accountant or talking to a banker or good bookkeeper or even a coach or a trainer as an expense. It's got to be considered as an investment. You spent a lot of money just to get started at whatever it is you're doing. You spend a lot of money to get those clients in place. So you got to make sure that you're investing a little bit of money to make sure that you're heading in the right direction, that you're not handing out those really crappy contracts that you got off of, a GoDaddy website or something, or you're not getting stupid advice from whoever it is. I don't know, but think of it. And like Scott was saying, think about what it's costing you in lost revenue, lost production, lost time. It's a growth mindset. So I think everybody here all agrees that the clients that we want are the ones that have a growth mindset. And if you don't have a growth mindset, then you're gonna stay where you are.
Mm-hmm. Karen, what are your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, I was just thinking about my son, who's 28 years old, was a, iron worker, and now he's working in residential construction. And I know someday he's going to open his own business. And I have actually been amazed that he's already talking to his mom, obviously, because I've been there his whole life. But, he's wanting people like you, Tanya, and bankers, and he hasn't even started his business or taken the licensing test or any of that. And so I started to think about him. Well, how did he know that? He keeps telling his owners, well, my mom's a construction attorney, and they're happy with wherever they're at, which is fine. But I was thinking about, this whole program that you put together and that you're recording it. I'm going to send it to my son. I'm going to, we really just need to get the word out there to businesses that it's so important. And I think, all of us, the things that we've shared, it's going to make me more open-minded still to the people that are coming in to see me, to make sure that I'm doing some of the things that you guys said and suggested. And I think we just want to get that word out there. And thank you, Tanya, for putting this together. And I think it would help people that are sophisticated business owners, as well as people like my son that want to be a business owner someday. So thank you.
Great. Yeah. Scott, what do you think, again, in terms of how do we get that word out there?
The first thing that came to my mind was industry specific trade organizations like the Arizona American Subcontractors Association, right? So you think about advocacy for your industry, and you think about specific trade organizations that have expertise in what you're doing. And not only that, they want to see you succeed. That's the purpose of their existence, right? So if you can align yourself with those types of organizations, I'm thinking of ASA because they have education courses. What is it? I think it was the summer school program that they just put on.
Yeah.
And they cover multiple different areas at different times, right? And so one week it could be something about PEOs and how you could kind of outsource your employee, your payroll and your benefits and your workers' comp, and just all these different issues that nobody wants to deal with. But it could also be introduction on financial reporting and financial management, and just a number of different issues that they will bring to the table. And not only that, you have a voice there, right? So if they're not bringing it to the table, you can raise your hand and say, hey, maybe we could bring somebody like this in and talk to us about this. So align yourselves with industry advocates and organizations like that would probably be the biggest place I would start.
Mm-hmm. That really makes a lot of sense. I was thinking, again, those strategic alliances really help. We have a potential client that has recently come our way that is reaching out to us because they're about to start their construction business. And that's it's really a unicorn for us, because mostly it's folks who are like, oh my gosh, I was asked for a WIP report and I don't really know how to prepare it. Please help. And so then we have to dive in and we're helping them get cleaned up. And so this is so refreshing and fun to be able to start doing some strategic planning with them from the beginning. But that opportunity came to us through some really strategic alliances that we've been building over the last 7 years. So a CPA who had heard of us from another CPA said they were approached, that CPA was approached by this client, and she said, listen, I'm not a construction expert, but I know someone who is, right? So I think that's a huge piece of this too, is just slowly over time, everything runs on the rails of relationship. And so as you build those strategic alliances, and as people do approach you, being able, like you said earlier, Rick, to say, that's not in my wheelhouse, but I know someone that can help you in that. And so just consistently being a great referral partner to all of your referral partners and helping them out in that way as well. So it's another great way to think about that.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. I really appreciate all of your time and your insight. I think it's been really fantastic. I'm super excited to have this recording and to be able to continue to share this information out there.
It's great.
Hey, thank you
Great.
all.
Thank you all.
Nice seeing you.
Thanks, guys.
If you would like to join the next panel discussion, or you have topics you would like to be discussed with experts in the field, please email hello@theprofitconstructors.com.